So tonight we're having a public hearing for two proposed sites, grow out sites for oyster mariculture in Matagorda Bay. And the purpose of this meeting is to provide information on the two proposed sites, answer any questions you may have about those sites, and give instructions on how to submit public comment. A little background on cultivated oyster mariculture, if you aren't familiar, is that TPWD permits the activity of oyster mariculture at grow-out sites, so growing for consumption, and nursery hatchery facilities. We require off-bottom aquaculture, so gear that floats in the water column, does not rest on the water column bottom. And applicants nominate their own sites and conduct a natural resource survey. The permit is a 10-year permit, and it is only for eastern oyster from Texas broodstock. There are three types of gear in general that these grow-out sites use. Floating bags. So these bags are of a rigid plastic mesh. They have floats on them. They're about 2 feet by 3 feet. A step up in size, not anything about capacity or facility, are floating cages. And so these floating cages are a larger hardwired structure that then has slots for those mesh envelopes, plastic envelopes of holding oysters to fit in. And they have larger floats on them where there are two positions with the floats on the top and the oysters in the water called the feeding position. So the oysters are feeding, and then they can also be flipped over with the oysters out of the water and the floats down in the water. That is called a desiccation position. It's used both to control algae and other organisms on the gear and help with cleaning and that sort of thing by drying out that algae, having those little crabs fall out. There is another system also called an adjustable long line system. This is usually done in shallower water that's waist to chest deep in height. There are cabling and poles, and there are usually three positions of those cablings. There's clip, and so those are oyster baskets, hard, rigid baskets, about 3 feet long, a foot in diameter. They're ovalish, and that line gets moved up. There's a position that's up holding the line out of the water, and then in the water just under the surface, and then a lower line that would be used if there was a storm coming to lower those down into the water column. An annual fee is paid based on the size of either the grow out or the nursery hatchery site. Applicants must also get authorizations from other agencies, such as the Texas General Land Office, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and U.S. Coast Guard. We do have an active use criteria of planting a certain amount of seed per acre per year. Year-round harvest is allowed, however, they must comply with all Texas Department State Health Service regulations. Just some real quick on those regulations. So we, both agencies work together, and the Department of Health, and this part that's under their jurisdiction, they sample our water bodies and give waters classifications for shellfish oyster harvest. So if we say a water isn't approved or restricted, that only applies to shellfish harvest. That does not affect any other types of activity or restrict any other types of activity. That designation is a designation, health designation for harvest. Water classifications, again, do not impact anything except harvest, either through mariculture, wild oyster harvest, or recreational harvest of oysters, both in mariculture and wild oyster. TPWD, we're not involved in those water classifications. Again, that's Human Health Services. And for more information, please visit the Texas Department of State Health Services website and their Seafood and Aquatic Life Group. So on to tonight. These are two grow out sites. They are both located in Matagorda Bay, which is Shellfish Harvest Area TX15, and these are approved waters. Each is 5 acres and they are adjacent to each other, as you'll see in the next few slides of the sites, and that's why we are doing these both at the same time. The applicants, while there are 2 applicants and 2 separate sites, both proposed 19 and 20, they work together to do their natural resource survey, since a lot of that overlapped, and their application operation plans were worked together and were very, very similar. So vicinity map, this is in Matagorda County, on the western edge of Matagorda County, in Matagorda Bay, and closer to an area called Oyster, locally known more as Oyster Lake. As you can see here in this picture, what you see, the 2 proposed sites are in purple, highlighted by this red rectangle. Also, what you will see, this green rectangle is a fully permitted site, and the 2 golden colors are conditionally permitted sites, Oyster Mariculture sites. To zoom in a little bit more here, so green is site G-0013, and it is fully permitted. They are allowed to conduct activities. Also, if you want to see any of these sites up closer, if you go to our Oyster Mariculture page and the TPWD Oyster Mariculture page, in the sidebar, you can scroll down and we have what is a link to TextCom Viewer, and it opens an application that has the maps and information about each one of these sites and their status. Next to that is G-0010. It has a conditional permit, so they've gone through this whole process that we are doing tonight, and they're currently seeking other agency authorizations. And then another conditionally permitted site, G-0011, up a little bit further away into the north. So the 2 sites, G-0019 is more on your screen. It would be on the left. Spatially in relations, it's going to be more southwest, and 0020 on the right-hand side, and spatially slightly more to the northeast if you're looking at cardinal directions. So these 2 sites are within 300 feet of each other, so each provided, as part of their application, letters that they are aware the other site is that close, and they are okay with that. They're working together. They are also within 540 feet of this conditionally permitted site, G-0010. They also provided letters from the holders of that permit that they were aware that these sites would be that close to them, and that they are okay with that and in an agreement. The proposed route maps look very similar for both, going from the harbor there in Palacios Bay out and around the point and over to their sites. So if you're used to these presentations, I'm going to switch up the order here, just again to get to the point of why we're reviewing these together. Now, public comment, you can provide comment on either or both of the sites. You don't have to necessarily do it together. So the 2 sites, here, again, each one of these are 5 acres, and they have their, around the site in light blue is a 100-foot buffer, and then there's a 200-foot buffer around that, and then there's a 500-foot buffer. They did both side scan to supplement their sediment grab, and this diagram here on the right-hand side of your screen shows all the different points where those sediment grabs were taken. So the sonar scan was conducted in October of 2023, and the sediment samples were collected in December on 2 different dates. A total of 230 samples were collected with a PVC sampling device has a larger end, that 4 to 6 inch range. A smaller, then it's capped into a 1 inch PVC pipe, and then there's a valve there, so they'll punch the sampler down into the sediment and turn that valve to create that suction, so then they can bring up that sediment to sample. The composition across the site was mud, and there was no evidence of oyster habitat or seagrass in any of those samples. The operations for these proposed sites have used gear of the floating cages with 10 to 15 cages per main line. That is within manufacturer's recommendation for those. They will have 6-foot helix anchors on either end of the lines and a buoy marking each anchor point that they have. We'll see in our next diagram those kind of 2 columns with rows in the columns. Navigational markers will be per Coast Guard requirements, but they plan on doing pilings on the corner markers and, of course, any other marking designations that the Coast Guard requires, such as our lights and proper signage, as also part of TPWD requirement. Bird deterrents they plan to use are either predator bird decoys, so not the kites, but the decoy statues on corner markers or posts that they have, and then on the actual floating gear themselves, large zip ties that stick out, creating kind of ticklers or spikes to keep birds from landing on the gear. So in this view shows dividing up the site, 2 columns, and then within each column, kind of an A and B side on those columns, then the rows of cages within that and spacing in between those. They will have an access route, and also a break in between the 2 columns, provide spacing for anchoring and maneuvering of boats through the area. This cross-sectional view shows the main line and then also shows the different positions, again, in that feeding position where the floats are on top, oysters are down, a flipped desiccation position used, and then if needed, the cages would be submerged in case of a hurricane or other type of tropical storm. Access will be via boat, and the site is relatively deep, over 6 feet, so all operations will be done on a boat, and they will use desiccation practice for their cages, following any resubmergence guidelines for harvest. And gear requiring extensive cleaning will be taken to land and cleaned at a location on land away from the water. Oysters will be tumbled and sorted as needed as they grow, as they split bags, either on the boat or on a land location. All gear will have identifying tags with contact information, and those tags are kind of plastic orange, a zip tie type fastener to that. For the hurricane plan that we require of all of our applicants to think through that, they will monitor storms as they enter the Gulf, adjust stocking densities, checking equipment lines, cages, bridles, closures on those, and then 72 hours prior to landfall. And if they're within the cone of uncertainty, we'll either sink the cages or adjust lines for storm surges, and both pre-storm preparations of checking gear and a post-storm recovery plan of evaluating refloating cages, finding lost gear, and submitting any sort of paperwork on that. The proposed sites G-0019 and G-0020 have an open comment period until July 9th. And public comment can be submitted to oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. After that, we will consider public comment, and next step would be a conditional permit would be issued for this, where mariculture activity cannot begin, but the applicants will then go get their other agency authorizations. Once those are all secured, we will review that and a final permit would be issued. So at this point, we will pause to see if there are any comments, or not comments, any questions. We do have one in the chat about distance from shore. And when we originally reviewed these sites, measurements from were greater than 1,000 feet from shore, but we can verify that again. Okay, Holly, I will hand it back over to you to do any sort of wrap up that we might have.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening. Just as a reminder, you will be getting, if you registered for this webinar, you will be getting an email reminder or an email from Zoom tomorrow with the email address where you can provide comment, along with the YouTube channel link where you can find a recording of this webinar and our link to our Oyster Mariculture page on the Parks and Wildlife website. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Lindsay and Leslie, for being online, and we will see you all next time. Thank you, everyone.